He yelled it so loud the walls almost trembled. "Pay the rent or get out!" The way his voice cut through the air still echoes in me, like a door slammed in the middle of prayer. I didn't shout back. I didn't even flinch. I simply looked at him, at the man my daughter once swore was the love of her life, and realized something inside me had finally died. You could smell the arrogance in his tone. That fake confidence of a man who thought the world bowed to his paycheck. He stood there, tall, in his pressed white shirt, one hand holding his phone like a weapon, the other pointing toward the door that led outside the same door I had installed, sanded, and painted myself years ago. He thought he was throwing out an old man. He didn't know he was challenging the owner. But let me start before that moment, before the shouting, before the insults, before my daughter's silence. When I first moved into their house, I didn't move as a burden. I moved as family. My wife had passed away 2 years earlier. The world felt quiet and empty, and I thought living closer to my daughter would fill the space grief had carved in me. They had a big home in the suburbs, one of those neat, polished neighborhoods where lawns are trimmed like military cuts, and everyone pretends to be happy behind perfect fences. My daughter, Grace, was always proud of it. "Dad," she said, "you'll finally have peace here. No more repairs, no more bills. Just rest." I believed her. For months, I lived in the guest room at the back. It wasn't much, just a small window facing the garden, but it felt like enough. I spent my mornings watering the flowers, fixing small things, and making breakfast before they woke up. I'd clean the gutters, trim the hedges, repair what others ignored. It gave me purpose. And every time my son-in-law, Philip, saw me working outside, he'd laugh. "You really can't sit still, can you, old man?" He thought it was a joke. But jokes reveal truths. Philip was the kind of man who measured worth by credit scores. If something couldn't be posted, priced, or praised online, it didn't matter. And to him, I was just an old relic living rent-free. At first, it didn't bother me. I had known men like him my whole life, men who built their identity on control. I simply smiled and said, "You'll understand when you're my age." But age, in his eyes, was weakness. He didn't see wisdom. He saw wasted time. There were good moments, though. Evenings when Grace would sit with me on the porch, her head on my shoulder, just like when she was a little girl. We'd talk about her mother, about life, about how fast things change. She'd say, "Dad, Philip's just stressed. Work's been crazy." And I'd nod, though I could already see it, the distance growing in her eyes, the way she began filtering what she told me, afraid I might disapprove of him. One night, I overheard them arguing. I didn't mean to. The house carried sound like whispers on glass. Philip's voice was low but cutting. "He's been here for months, Grace. He's not even paying rent. We can't afford to keep an extra mouth around." My heart sank. Not because of the words I'd heard worse, but because of what followed. Silence. Grace didn't defend me. I remember standing in my room that night, hands trembling, staring at the old photograph of her as a child, the one where she stood on my shoulders while I painted our first house together. I whispered to that picture, "What happened to us?" But instead of leaving, I chose to stay silent. Sometimes silence is a weapon sharper than words. And I had a plan, one they would never see coming. See, before I moved in, I had sold my old house, the one her mother and I built from the ground up. It wasn't much, but it was paid off. I'd spent 40 years in construction, laying bricks, fixing roofs, saving every dime. And when I sold that house, I made sure the money didn't vanish into thin air. I invested it. Quietly. Patiently. And when Philip and Grace bought this dream home, I was the silent investor behind the deal. They didn't know that when they signed the papers, my name was already tied to the deed through a trust. Grace had insisted she wanted me to move in as family, but legally, it was something else. The house was as much mine as theirs, maybe even more. But pride is a quiet thing. I never told them. I didn't need validation. I only wanted peace, a home where I could grow old surrounded by family. And for a while, I convinced myself that was enough. Until that morning. It started like any other Saturday. I made coffee before sunrise, the way I always did. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon and warmth. I liked mornings they were peaceful before the noise of the world began. Grace came downstairs half asleep, kissed my forehead, and said, "Morning, Dad." Her kindness always softened me. But then Philip followed. He didn't greet me. He just looked at the counter, frowned, and muttered, "You really should buy your own groceries." That was the first spark. The air changed. I kept silent. Old men like me know the power of silence. But silence doesn't feed egos, it threatens them. So he pushed further. "You know," he said, "most people your age live in retirement homes. It's not really fair to expect us to take care of everything." Grace froze. Her eyes darted between us. I saw shame flicker across her face. She didn't want to be part of that conversation. But she said nothing. I looked at him, calm as still water. "Philip," I said, "you have everything you ever wanted. Why does my presence bother you so much?" He laughed, that empty kind of laugh men use to cover fear. "Because, old man, this is my house. My rules." I looked around the kitchen, the cabinets I'd built, the walls I'd painted, the floors I'd repaired. His house? The irony almost made me smile. But then he leaned closer, voice dripping with superiority. "You either start paying rent or you pack your things. I'm done playing charity." "Grace," whispered. "Philip, stop." But he raised his hand, silencing her. He looked straight at me. "Did you hear me? Pay the rent or get out." That was the moment I realized how deeply he underestimated me, and how soon that arrogance would cost him everything. I nodded slowly, pushing back my chair. "All right," I said quietly, "if that's what you want." I walked to my room, packed a single suitcase, and left the key on the table. Grace followed me to the door, tears in her eyes. "Dad, please don't go like this." I smiled. "Sweetheart, some lessons in life can't be taught with words." Then I walked out, not as a man leaving in defeat, but as one walking toward justice already in motion. As I stepped outside, I could hear Philip muttering behind me, proud of himself. He thought he'd won. He thought he had finally proven his authority. He didn't know that the man he just threw out was already holding the papers that could erase him from that very property. And I intended to do exactly that. The sun was rising as I walked down the quiet street, suitcase in hand. A cool breeze brushed against my face. Neighbors waved, they didn't know anything had happened. But I smiled back anyway. Because they would soon know. The whole neighborhood would. And when that day came, Philip would finally learn the difference between ownership and possession. That morning, as I reached the end of the street, I took out my phone, opened my contacts, and called a number I hadn't used in years, the lawyer who helped me create the trust. He answered in his usual calm tone. "Good morning, mister," I interrupted softly. "It's time." There was a pause. Then he said, "Understood. I'll prepare the documents." I hung up and whispered to myself, "You threw me out of a house I already own, Philip. Let's see how it feels when you're the one outside." The wind picked up, carrying the faint sound of church bells from a distance. And I knew my wife would have approved. That was the day my quiet revenge began. I did not go far that morning. 2 blocks from the house, I stopped at a small park where the city planted maples in a careful row, like red flags marking a forgotten battlefield. The benches were damp with dew. The air had that cut-glass chill you only notice when you leave a warm kitchen behind. I sat with my suitcase tucked against my leg and let the quiet swallow the sound of my breath. A school bus exhaled at the corner. Brake pads hissed. A pair of kids in bright jackets raced each other to the stop, laughing, their sneakers slapping the sidewalk with a rhythm I remembered from decades ago. I closed my eyes. When I opened them again, the park looked the same, but I felt older by several years. I took out my phone and scrolled past the names I never call. My brother, long gone. Old coworkers scattered. Clients who still owed me one, though I never collected. The contact list was a graveyard of favors I chose not to use. I clicked the screen dark and listened to the wind. Cinnamon still clung to my clothes. The scent from that morning clashed with the cold street air and made my chest ache. I could see the mug I left in the sink, the thin ribbon of steam that used to curl from it like a blessing. I pictured Grace reaching for it after I walked out, her fingers pausing where mine had gripped the handle. Did she cry? Did she whisper my name? Or did Philip's words hang in the room, like nails, sharp enough to pin her silence to the wall? Grief likes to pretend it is simple. It is not. It is a museum of rooms you keep revisiting by mistake. I walked into one of those rooms now, a memory that smelled of fresh paint and apple soap. Grace was 5 the first time she called the house a castle. We had just installed a second-hand window I found at a salvage yard. I was younger then, hungry to turn scraps into shelter. I balanced her on my shoulders while she pressed her palms against the glass and breathed a fog hard on it. The sunlight made the dust look golden. Her mother laughed from the doorway and told me I had sawdust in my hair. There are men who build for applause. I built for that laugh, for that fog heart, for the way my little girl thought a window could be a miracle. Later that year, a storm peeled the shingles off like scabs. I remember the sound the wind made in the chimney, a hollow roar that rattled the plates. Grace woke up crying. I went out in the rain with a tarp, one boot missing a lace, hammer between my teeth. The roof was slick, and the nails were cold in my fingers. When I slipped, I cursed. When I finished, I came down shivering and dripping, and my wife wrapped me in a towel and scolded me for being stubborn. Grace curled against my side on the couch while we listened to the storm tire itself out. I told her a house is only brave if the people inside it are. Those nights shaped me into a man who does not collapse when someone raises his voice. I have heard louder things than anger. Rain on tin. Grief in a woman's throat. Hammers ringing at dawn. Philip thought a command could undo what storms failed to break. My phone buzzed. A text from Grace. Dad, where are you? Please answer. I stared at the message until the words blurred. Then I typed, I am safe. I will call later. Love you. I did not add my usual heart emoji. It felt like a lie to draw something round and warm when everything in me had angles. I booked a room at a motel by the highway, the kind with a flickering sign that never announces vacancy because it is permanent. The carpet smelled like bleach scattered over old smoke. The air conditioner coughed when it woke. The key card stuck the first time and surrendered the second. I set my suitcase on the rack, sat on the edge of the bed, and let the springs answer with a tired groan. Silence in a motel is different from silence at home. At home, silence is made of familiar weights. The clock in the hall. The refrigerator fan. The distant plumbing like winter geese. In that motel, silence was thin and brittle. Every sound from the next room bled through the wall, as if the building had bones made of paper. A man laughed at a game show. A woman dragged a suitcase. Somewhere, ice fell into a plastic bucket like tiny avalanches. I washed my face in water that ran cool even when the faucet turned to hot. The mirror above the sink had a cloudy corner that made my cheek look like smoke. I leaned close and studied the lines around my mouth. People say wrinkles are roads. Mine were more like scaffolding, the evidence of a man who kept building even when the building did not ask for him. The lawyer called. His voice was steady the way bridges feel underfoot. "Documents are in motion," he said. "As you wished, we will notify the trustee first, then the lender. With your authorization, I can begin the transfer protocols." Quietly, I repeated. "No noise yet." "As you prefer." He paused. "I assume family notice will be delicate." "Not yet," I said. "Let paper speak first." After we hung up, I lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. It had tiny bumps like the surface of a moon. The motel's air smelled faintly of lemon and old heat. I thought of the day I created the trust, the afternoon sun, a flat coin on the lawyer's desk, the way my hand shook when I signed. Not from doubt. From the weight of what I was building for a future I could not see. I told myself then that love sometimes has to wear a legal suit to survive the weather. I had put my name where it needed to be. Not to control, but to protect. I never imagined I would have to use that protection against my own daughter's husband. Yet here I was, lying on a motel bed, listening to the hollow laughter of strangers, preparing to exercise rights I had hoped would never be necessary. Memory does not ask permission. It barged in again, louder this time. The first dinner after Grace married Philip felt like a stage set. Their new house smelled like new money and vanilla candles. The tableware matched, a metallic gray that photographed well. Philip opened a bottle of wine by reading the label out loud, as if the words themselves cost something. He asked me how construction was treating me, then answered his own question with market statistics he learned from a video. Grace tried to soften the corners of the evening with jokes. I laughed in the right places. When I offered to fix the wobbly banister on the stairs, Philip put a hand on my shoulder and said, "We can just hire someone." He meant, "We don't want your fingerprints on this place." I went home that night and sanded a piece of scrap pine until my hand stopped trembling. For all his polish, Philip loved shortcuts. He loved appearances more than foundations. He leased cars that looked expensive and forgot oil changes. He posted restaurant photos and left half his meals uneaten. He bought the house because the front door made a statement, then let the caulking rot behind the siding. He did not understand that houses, like marriages, will eventually show you the parts you neglect. I understood. I built my life around the things you do not see. Joists, girders, vows whispered over dishes. That winter, after my wife died, Grace came to stay with me for a week. She cried herself to sleep on my couch while the television played a nature documentary with the sound off. I made her tea and sat beside her until morning. When she woke, she pressed her face to my chest and soaked my shirt with the echo of a loss we both carried. I told her she could move in. She said she would be fine. A few months later she married Philip. Sometimes, I wonder if grief made both of us choose badly. She chose a man who hid his fears behind a career. I chose silence when I should have asked harder questions. Around noon the motel's ice machine went still, and the hallway smelled like microwave noodles. I took a walk. The highway hummed like a giant, patient animal. A gas station across the road advertised beef jerky and windshield fluid. A woman in a sun-faded uniform watered a patch of flowers fighting for life beside the dumpster. I watched her for a while, then waved. She waved back and smiled as if we shared a secret. Maybe we did. Maybe we both believe that small care in ugly places is a kind of rebellion. I bought a notebook at the gas station, the cheapest one, its paper thin and eager to tear. I wrote down what I could not say to Grace without breaking. The ink bled through the page in places where my hand pressed too hard. I listed the years I carried her on my shoulders. The first bike I fixed with a wrench and a prayer. The fruit cups I packed for field trips. The late-night drives after high school heartbreaks when the radio played songs that felt like the future. I wrote about the day she told me she was pregnant, and I cried in the truck because I already loved the grandchild I had not met. I wrote about every hinge I oiled and every window I washed while living in their guest room because I did not know how to be a guest in my own daughter's life. The last line I wrote was simple. This hurts not because I was told to leave a house, but because I was told to leave a home. I closed the notebook and pressed my palm to the cover as if I could keep the words from escaping. Grace called. I let it ring twice longer than usual before I answered. Dad? Her voice had that thinness grief gives you when you're trying not to cry. I'm here, I said. Where did you go? To think. Silence. Then softer. He should not have said that. He said what was in him, I replied. Words reveal their house of origin. I told him to stop. I told him. I know. I want you to come back. We will talk. We will fix it. I will not come back today, I said. There are papers moving. Things I should have set in motion long ago. Papers? Her breath quickened. Dad, what papers? The kind that tell the truth. She was very quiet. I heard the hum of their refrigerator, even from a distance through a phone. I pictured her standing by the kitchen island, free hand gripping the edge until her knuckles went white. Please, she said, don't turn this into war. I am not turning it into anything, I answered. I am letting what already is reveal itself. She didn't have a reply for that. At last she whispered, I love you, and hung up before love had time to grow a fight around it. I went back to the room and lay on the bed with the lights off. I let my ears do the seeing. A car door thumped outside. A faucet shrieked. Somewhere, a child laughed in bursts, the pure kind that makes even heavy men smile. I could have called friends. I could have called the pastor who still checks on me every Easter. I could have called the union buddy who owes me a favor. I called no one. The only voice I needed to hear then came from inside, the one my wife used to say sounded like a level finally finding true. It told me to remember the humiliation in detail, not to indulge it, but to understand it. So I remembered. I remembered Philip correcting my grammar in front of the neighbors when I said less instead of fewer. I remembered his hand on the small of Grace's back, too firm, guiding her out of conversations as if she were a cart he owned. I remembered the time he passed me a stapled spreadsheet showing household costs, a neat column for utilities, and a blank line at the bottom he labeled contribution. The staples bit my fingers when I held it. I bled just a little and said nothing. Later that week I fixed their garbage disposal and left the receipt tucked under the magnet shaped like a lighthouse. He did not say thank you. He posted a photo of takeout sushi instead. I remembered the sound his shoes made on the hardwood in the mornings, that fast, confident clicking, as if the floor itself should be grateful for his weight. I remembered the way he looked at my toolbox when I took it from the closet. He glanced away with a smile that wasn't one, then told a story about a contractor who overcharged him on a remodel at the office. I wanted to tell him half the cost of any good job is the man's life poured into the work. I swallowed the words like stones. I remembered the night he bought a grill so big it needed 2 people to wheel it from the truck. He hosted a party and forgot to buy charcoal. I improvised with an old bag I kept in my truck for emergencies. The meat came out perfect. Everyone cheered. He told them the grill made it easy. I drank water and watched the stars sneak out one by one. Humiliation has textures. Paper cuts. Shoe clicks. The feel of carrying a plate back to the kitchen because no one asked you to sit. When you catalog those textures, they cease being fog and become fuel. I was running out of fog. Evening crawled across the highway like a slow spill of ink. The motel sign snapped on with a buzz. I walked back to the gas station for a sandwich that tasted like damp bread and salt. A stray dog followed me halfway, and then chose a different sadness to keep. When I returned, a new car had parked beside mine, its hood warm and ticking. A man leaned against it speaking into his phone in a language I did not know, laughing with his whole mouth. I envied him that laughter. I hoped he never learned to make it quieter. Back in the room, I unfolded a map of the neighborhood I had printed months earlier when I was repairing an old fence and needed measurements. I traced the streets with my finger, found our cul-de-sac, marked the easement line behind their backyard, where the soil always settled after heavy rain. I wrote down the names of the title officer, the lender's agent, the HOA president who once told me my ladder lowered the neighborhood's look. I drew a small square where the property line cut through the garden bed I had built. That square made something inside me lock into place. I whispered into the empty room, not to be dramatic, but to practice letting the words leave my body. He ordered me to leave a house that already had my name hidden inside its bones. He measured me wrong. He measured me by the surface. My wife loved to say that patience is not passive. It is a slow hammer. Every day you swing, even when the nail hides in a knot. That night, I could feel the handle of that hammer in my palm again. My patience had left dents. Now it would set a beam. I set my alarm for early. Before I slept, I sent one more message to Grace. I will come by tomorrow afternoon to collect a few things. Please make sure Philip is home. I did not add why. She would imagine reasons all night. Some would scare her. Some would comfort her. All of them would soften the ground for what had to be done. Sleep finally found me. It did not cradle. It pressed. It pushed me down into a dream full of doors that didn't open and one door that did, not with a handle, but with a breath. Morning arrived smelling like asphalt and weak coffee. I ironed my shirt with my hands and walked to the lobby for the kind of breakfast that comes from packets and patience. The clerk nodded at me with the world-weary kindness of someone who has learned to greet everyone the same. I ate slowly, while sunlight crept across the floor in narrow blades. My lawyer texted a single line. All parties notified. Trustee acknowledged. Awaiting your go. I typed back. Proceed. Then I added, notify me when the title officer confirms receipt. He replied with a thumbs up made of pixels. Even that small symbol felt like a stamp. On the drive back to the neighborhood, I rolled down the window and let cold air slice my thoughts into cleaner pieces. The houses grew nicer as the speed limit fell. Lawns lifted their green chins. Flags hung from porches. Wind chimes told secrets to anyone willing to hear them. I turned onto our street and slowed. The maples from yesterday whispered from their neat posts beside the road. I parked 3 houses away and walked the rest. My shoes clicked on the pavement. That sound had belonged to Philip. Now it belonged to me. Grace saw me first. She stood on the porch, sweater sleeves over her hands, hair pulled back in a hurried knot. Her eyes were red. She stepped down to meet me at the walkway. Dad, she said, her voice frayed on the edges. He is inside. He is calmer. Are you? I asked. She swallowed. I don't know. We stood like that for a moment, the house watching us with its windows held like breath. The hydrangeas I planted last spring had gone brown and papery. I brushed my hand across one bloom, and it crumbled like a letter you finally stop rereading. Before I go in, I said, I need you to hear something. Not as your father. As a man who has made mistakes and carried them like tools. I have been too quiet. I thought silence kept peace. Sometimes silence keeps liars comfortable. Today I will not be quiet. Her chin trembled. She nodded. I stepped inside. The smell of lemon cleaner tried to erase yesterday. It failed. Philip stood at the kitchen island with a mug in his hand, the kind that says best boss or world's greatest something. He did not look at me right away. He looked at the phone on the counter, then at Grace, then at me. Back already? He said. The words carried a thin film of caution. We can talk like adults this time. I set my small bag on the chair and placed the notebook on top of it. I took a breath. The refrigerator hummed like distant bees. A neighbor's lawnmower started, then stopped. Somewhere a dog barked twice and gave up. Philip, I said, yesterday you gave me a choice. Pay the rent or get out. He smirked. I was frustrated. I know. I nodded. I am grateful for your clarity. He frowned, trying to parse the sentence. Grace watched our faces like a person reading subtitles on a foreign film. Before I collect my things, I continued, there is a delivery scheduled for this address today. It will arrive by email and by hand. Please sign when it comes. It confirms the transfer of certain administrative rights regarding this property to the trustee listed in the deed. You will recognize the name. He blinked. Something behind his eyes shuffled its feet. What transfer? He said. The one that reflects who actually holds the house. I answered. The bank holds the house. He shot back. The bank holds the mortgage. I said gently. Ownership lives elsewhere. His smirk flickered. He glanced at Grace. She stared at me, as if the tiles under her feet had suddenly become glass, and she could see the floor below. What is he talking about? Philip asked her. She shook her head. I don't know. You will, I said. Very soon. I picked up the bag and the notebook. I will be back this evening after you have read what arrives. If you wish to speak then, we will speak. If not, paper will do the speaking for us. I walked to the door. Before I opened it, I looked at the walls one last time. The paint was still good. My hands knew how the roller had felt. I set my palm against the frame. Wood recognizes its workers. The grain under my skin hummed like an old friend. Philip, I said without turning, yesterday you told me my presence was unfair. Today you will meet fairness by its proper name. What name is that? He snapped. Truth, I said, and stepped out into the bright, cold noon. On the porch the air felt lighter, the kind of lightness that comes after a storm stops pretending it will go on forever. I heard footsteps behind me. Grace caught my sleeve. Did you buy this house? She whispered. Dad, did you? I made sure you would never be homeless, I said. I did not expect you to invite homelessness into me. Her shoulders shook. I softened my voice. I love you. That has not changed. But love that never tells the truth becomes flattery, and flattery is a cheap carpenter. It builds rooms that collapse. She covered her mouth with her hand. What happens now? Now, I said. We let the foundation show. I walked down the steps and left her on the porch with the question still opening in the air. The maple leaves rattled like thin applause. Back in the car, I let the engine idle while I stared at the house. A delivery van turned onto the street and slowed at the curb. The driver checked a clipboard, then carried a sealed envelope to the door. He rang the bell. Philip answered. Even from the car, I could see annoyance on his face. He signed. He held the envelope like a thing that might stain. He closed the door with that careful pressure people use when they know something delicate lives on the other side. I exhaled. Humiliation, when left alone, grows mold. I had aired mine out in the open. It did not hurt less. It hurt cleaner. By evening, The title officer would acknowledge receipt. The HOA president would learn the name that sat in the trust for years. The lender would mark the account for contact only through counsel. Power does not always arrive with sirens. Sometimes it knocks like a polite neighbor and changes the locks after you sign. That night, I would choose the clothes I wore the day Grace graduated college. I would iron them slowly. I would polish my shoes until I could see the face of the man I used to be and the man I was becoming in the same blur. I would sleep the way carpenters sleep before a big job, knowing the measurements by heart, hearing the rhythm of the nails ahead of time. Tomorrow would be the beginning of justice. But tonight, I allowed myself to feel the whole ache. I let the motel room be a sanctuary where grief could finish its sentence without interruption. I brewed tea in a small machine that tasted faintly of other people's mornings. I opened the window to let in the highway's endless hymn. I read my notebook out loud to no one. When I reached the line about leaving a home, my voice broke. I let it. Broken voices still carry truth. Sometimes they carry more. I turned off the lamp and lay in the dark with my hands folded on my chest like a man at peace. I was not at peace. Not yet. But I could feel its approach. Like steps on a stair. Like a breath through a door with no handle. Tomorrow, I would stop being the man who takes commands in his own house. Tomorrow, I would become the man who speaks with the authority of the foundations he laid. And Philip would learn that when you tell a builder to leave, you had better check whose name is stamped beneath the floor. The next morning broke sharper than glass. The sky above the motel was a bleached gray, the kind of light that doesn't comfort, it interrogates. I sat at the edge of the bed, hands folded, waiting for the message I knew would come. At exactly 8:47 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was an email from my lawyer. Subject: title confirmation transfer recorded. The body of the message was brief. Record complete. New ownership record registered under the trust. Notice delivered to both residents. Contact me before noon if you wish to execute the secondary clause. I didn't need to read it twice. The secondary clause, that was the one I had drafted years ago, the clause that gave me full management control if the property was ever misused or abandoned by those listed under occupancy. Philip's arrogance had triggered it perfectly. When you spend decades working in construction, you learn that every crack begins as a whisper. You hear the fault before you see it. And once it starts spreading, there's no silencing it. This was the whisper that told me, enough pretending, enough silence. I got in my truck and started driving toward the neighborhood. The tires hummed against the asphalt like a calm heartbeat. But inside, something new stirred, a heat I hadn't felt in years. Not rage, exactly. Something older. Justice waking up after a long nap. I drove past familiar houses, each one a reflection of Philip's favorite word: status. Perfect lawns. Identical mailboxes. The illusion of control. But control is fragile when it's borrowed. Halfway there, Grace called again. Her voice was thin, shaking, as though the house itself had become a stranger to her. Dad, the lawyer came by. I know. He said the trust lists you as primary owner. That's correct. Philip's furious. I imagine he is. She paused. I could hear muffled shouting in the background, then a door slam. Please, Dad, she whispered. Don't embarrass him. Let's fix this quietly. Grace, I said softly, you spent too many years covering for other people's noise. Silence doesn't fix arrogance, it fertilizes it. But he'll lose everything, she cried. I took a deep breath. Then maybe he'll learn what everything actually means. I hung up before my resolve could soften. By the time I pulled onto the street, neighbors were already outside, pretending to water plants and walk dogs, little suburban camouflage for gossip. They had seen the lawyer's car earlier. They could sense something was unraveling. Philip's SUV was parked crooked in the driveway, like anger itself had parked it. The front door was open. I stepped out of the truck and walked up the path, the sound of my boots striking concrete steady, deliberate. Grace met me on the porch. She looked exhausted, hair messy, eyes swollen. "He's inside," she said quietly. "He's calling the bank." "Let him call," I said. I stepped inside and saw him standing by the counter, phone pressed to his ear, pacing in tight circles. He didn't even look up at first. "Yes, I'm telling you, there's been some mistake," he snapped. "The deed can't just change, someone has to approve that." "Yes, my father-in-law, well, ex-father-in-law, apparently he's claiming." He stopped mid-sentence when he finally noticed me. His jaw tightened. "I'll call you back," he muttered and ended the call. Then he pointed at me, finger trembling with fury. "What the hell did you do?" I set my keys on the counter with a calm click. "I made sure the house belonged to the man who actually paid for it." "You're insane," he barked. "You think you can just walk in and—" "I'm not walking in," I interrupted. "I'm returning." His face went red. "You can't just take my home." "Philip," I said quietly, "you were the one who took mine first." He opened his mouth, then closed it. For a brief second, confusion replaced rage. "What do you mean yours?" "I mean," I said, "that before you ever signed the mortgage, before you moved Grace in, before you built this illusion of success, this property was purchased through a trust. A trust one funded with the sale of my house. You see, I built this place with my hands, my money, and my faith that one day it would be a home for family. But family doesn't evict family." Grace's hand covered her mouth. She turned toward Philip, whispering, "You told me he didn't contribute." He shot her a glare. "Don't twist this." "He's lying." I chuckled softly, not from amusement but from pity. "You spent so much of your life lying upward, Philip, you can't recognize the truth even when it's notarized." I pulled out a folder from my jacket, the official trust confirmation papers. I laid them on the table. "Here," I said. "Read it, and understand it before you speak again." He grabbed the documents, scanned the lines, and I watched the color drain from his face. What is this clause?" he asked, pointing to the highlighted section. "That," I said, "is the clause that states, in the event of mistreatment, neglect, or displacement of the original investor, full ownership transfers to him indefinitely." His eyes darted between the lines, his hand shaking. "You tricked us." "No," I replied. "I protected what I built." Grace stepped forward, voice trembling. "Dad, why didn't you tell me?" "Because," I said softly, "you loved him. And I didn't want your love to become collateral damage." Philip slammed the folder shut. "You can't do this. The neighborhood will hear about this. I'll sue you for fraud." I smiled faintly. "You can't sue truth, Philip. It just keeps showing up." He stormed out the front door, phone in hand, dialing someone, maybe the lender, maybe a lawyer, maybe just a lifeline for his pride. Grace stayed inside, shaking her head, half in shock, half in relief. "Dad," she whispered, "he's ruined. Everything he built." I looked around the room, the spotless counters, the empty champagne bottles, the trophies that said top sales executive of the quarter. "Grace," I said, "everything he built was already hollow. I'm just removing the walls." For the first time in years, the house felt honest. No more pretending. No more careful politeness over coffee. Just air. Just truth. And yet, something in me still hurt. Not because I wanted revenge, but because even justice carries splinters. That night, I stayed in the guest room again, the same one I had been told to leave. The sheets still smelled faintly of lavender detergent. As I lay there, I thought of my wife again, her voice, her patience, her quiet way of forgiving even those who didn't deserve it. I whispered into the dark. Tell me I did the right thing. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was peaceful. It sounded like approval. At dawn, I brewed coffee again. Same routine, same kitchen, same mug. But this time, it tasted different. It tasted like closure. When I stepped outside, Philip's SUV was gone. Grace sat on the steps, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the driveway. Where did he go? I asked. She shrugged. To his brother's, I think. Will he come back? She shook her head slowly. Not after this. We sat in silence for a while. The sky was turning soft pink, the kind of morning that makes even broken people look like they're healing. After a long pause, she said, You were right, Dad. About silence. It doesn't save peace, it kills it. I nodded. Sometimes the quietest men carry the loudest lessons. Later that day, the HOA president showed up, clipboard in hand, fake smile plastered on his face. Good morning, sir, he said. I hear there's been a change in ownership. I looked him in the eye and replied, Yes. The home is now under full control of the original investor. You can put that in your notes. He adjusted his glasses, visibly nervous. I see. Well, congratulations, Mr. No need for congratulations, I interrupted. Just respect. When he left, I stood at the end of the driveway and looked at the house that had been both shelter and battlefield. And I realized something profound. Revenge isn't about payback. It's about restoration. This wasn't destruction, it was balance returning. But deep down, I knew the story wasn't over yet. Philip wasn't the kind of man to disappear quietly. He would try to fight back, to reclaim his pride, to make me look like the villain. And when he did, the truth would not just humiliate him, it would expose him publicly. He wanted war. He was about to learn what it meant to pick a fight with a man who builds foundations for a living. Tomorrow, I'd make my next move. Not out of anger. Out of necessity. Because some men only understand lessons when the entire world becomes the classroom. And Philip was about to enroll in his final one. Morning arrived the way truth does, slow, steady, and impossible to ignore. The kind of morning that doesn't ask permission to change everything. I sat at the kitchen table, sunlight crawling across the floor, the smell of coffee rising like an old promise. The house was quiet now. Grace had gone upstairs to rest. Philip's absence filled the air heavier than his presence ever did. I stared at the marble counter, polished, perfect, fake. Just like him. Every reflection in that stone reminded me of the years I spent being polite, being silent, being manageable. Not anymore. When you build houses, you learn something sacred about destruction. Sometimes you must take a wall down to save the whole structure. That day, I decided to take down the wall, named Philip calmly, legally, publicly. My first call was to my lawyer, Mr. Crane. He'd been with me for decades, the kind of man who aged like oak, sturdy, calm, and quietly intimidating. Crane speaking, he said. It's time to move forward, I replied. With the clause execution? Yes. And with the notice of eviction. He didn't hesitate. You're sure? I'm certain. There was a brief silence on the line, the kind that carries weight. Then he said, Then we'll proceed as discussed. By law, you have full authority. I'll file the eviction notice today and schedule a public announcement at the HOA meeting. Public? I asked. He exhaled lightly. You once told me truth is useless if it hides in paperwork. I smiled. I did, didn't I? After the call, I sat back and let the reality of it sink in. By evening, everyone in the neighborhood, those same polished people who used to wave at Philip's shiny SUV, would learn that the man they envied didn't even own the roof over his head. But this wasn't about humiliation. It was about accountability. I wasn't destroying him. I was revealing him. Grace came downstairs a few hours later, her face pale but calm. She carried 2 mugs of coffee, one for me, one for herself. She sat across the table, eyes soft, searching. "Dad," she said quietly, "what happens now?" "Now," I said. "The truth has a chance to breathe." She looked down, stirring her coffee, though it didn't need stirring. "He's panicking," she whispered. "He called his firm. He's afraid of how this will look." I leaned forward. "That fear is new to him. Let him feel it." Tears welled in her eyes. "I didn't see it, Dad. I swear, I didn't see who he really was until now." "You loved him," I said. "That's not blindness. That's hope. You just kept hoping he'd grow into a better man." She nodded slowly, shoulders trembling. "And what are you going to do?" I took a deep breath. "I'm going to teach him what integrity looks like when it walks through fire and doesn't flinch." That afternoon, I opened the old toolbox I'd brought from my workshop. Inside was a folded blueprint, not of a house, but of the trust. Every legal path, every clause, every option was mapped out neatly, like a construction plan. I studied it the way I'd study a foundation before pouring cement, methodically, patiently, knowing one wrong measurement could ruin everything. Step 1, legal notice. Step 2, HOA acknowledgement. Step 3, press authorization, quietly handled by a local paper that specialized in property disputes. Step 4, a small public forum at the HOA meeting where I would read the ownership clause aloud. Justice, when built carefully, becomes a structure no light can survive. At 3 p.m., I called Mr. Crane again. "I want to be there when the notice is served." "Of course," he said. "I'll arrange for the process server to meet us at 5. 5 o'clock. I repeated, feeling the rhythm of the moment, the countdown to reckoning. By late afternoon, clouds began to gather, thick and gray, as if the sky itself had chosen to bear witness. I stood outside on the porch, watching the neighborhood hum with its shallow calm, dogs barking, sprinklers ticking, garage doors whining. Soon, that calm would fracture. Grace joined me. "He's upstairs packing," she said softly. "I think he knows it's over." "Then let him pack," I said. "The house will breathe easier." 5 o'clock came with a knock on the door. The process server stood there, a young man in a black jacket holding a manila envelope. His expression was professional, detached. "Eviction notice for Mr. Philip Ward," he said. I nodded. "You may hand it to me. I'll make sure it's received." Philip appeared on the stairs, face flushed, eyes wild. "What's this?" he barked. The man held out the envelope. "Legal notice of property transfer and termination of residence." Philip snatched it, ripped it open, scanned the text, and his voice broke on the first line. He looked at me, hand shaking. You won't get away with this." "I'm not trying to get away with anything," I said quietly. "I'm standing exactly where you tried to remove me from. The difference is, I have the paperwork to prove it." He threw the envelope onto the floor. "You humiliated me in front of the neighborhood." I took a step closer. "No, Philip. You humiliated yourself when you forgot who built the ground you're standing on." His jaw clenched. For a moment, I thought he might hit me. But he didn't. Instead, he stormed out the front door, slamming it so hard that the glass rattled in its frame. The process server turned to me, almost impressed. "You handled that better than most." I smiled faintly. "Son, I've dealt with collapsing roofs and fire inspectors. This was just another crack sealing itself." He chuckled and left. Grace sat down on the bottom step, head in her hands. "Dad, I never wanted it to end like this." "It didn't end, sweetheart," I said gently. "It just revealed the truth that was buried under a fresh coat of paint. She looked up, eyes wet. What will people say? I smiled sadly. They'll say what they always say. But eventually, they'll see what they always miss, that real ownership isn't about money. It's about heart. Evening fell, heavy and beautiful. The neighborhood lights flickered on, one by one, like curious eyes. I put on my jacket and walked to the community center for the HOA meeting. Grace didn't come. She said she wasn't ready. I didn't push her. This wasn't her burden to carry. The meeting was held in the usual sterile room, a place that smelled like lemon polish and self-importance. The HOA president, Mr. Lowell, adjusted his tie as I walked in. A few neighbors turned their heads, whispering. "Well," he said, forcing a smile, "Mr. Ward, quite an eventful week, I hear." "Indeed," I replied. "And tonight the air clears." He gestured toward the podium. "You requested the floor for a brief statement?" "Yes." I walked up to the front, the sound of my shoes echoing through the room. My hands didn't shake. My heart didn't race. I had built stronger beams under worse storms. I laid the trust folder on the podium and spoke clearly, each word measured. "Neighbors, I stand before you not to gloat, but to clarify. You all know me as the quiet old man who lived with his daughter and her husband. You probably saw me trimming the hedges, fixing the fence, patching roofs for free." Soft laughter rippled through the crowd. Recognition. "What you didn't know," I continued, "is that the home at 314 Brookfield Lane was purchased through a private trust, one I established years ago after selling my original home. The funds from that sale built the very house many of you admired. I did it as a gift to my daughter, believing she had married a man of respect." Gasps filled the room. I could see whispers spreading like brush fire. "Unfortunately," I said, "respect turned to arrogance. And yesterday, that man ordered me to leave the very house I built. But today, I stand before you as its rightful owner." The room fell silent. You could hear the buzz of the fluorescent lights. "I do not seek revenge," I said, "but I do believe in justice, the kind that reminds people that pride without gratitude is poverty in disguise." A woman in the front row nodded slowly, eyes shining. Mr. Lowell cleared his throat. "Well, that certainly explains the recent filings. On behalf of the HOA, we'll update the records." "Thank you," I said. When I stepped down from the podium, a few neighbors came up to me quietly. "Didn't know you were the one who built that place," one man said. "Always figured you had more sense than he did," another added. I just smiled and thanked them. When I returned home that night, the porch light was on. Grace was sitting there, waiting. She stood as I approached, her eyes searching mine. "It's done?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "And him?" "Gone for now. He'll try to fight it, but the law's already spoken." She nodded slowly. "Dad, I don't know whether to cry or thank you." I put a hand on her shoulder. "Do both. Cry for what ended. Thank God for what survived." We stood there for a long time, the house behind us glowing softly, finally at peace. The same home that once held tension now felt lighter, as if it could finally breathe. But even as the night settled in, I knew the story wasn't finished. Philip was a man who couldn't lose quietly. He would come back not for the house, but for his reputation. And when he did, the next chapter wouldn't be written in paper. It would be written in truth, spoken aloud for everyone to hear. Tomorrow, I would prepare for that confrontation, the one that would strip away his last defense, pride. Because no man survives long when the mask he wears begins to melt in front of witnesses. And when Philip's mask fell, it wouldn't be quiet. It would echo through every neighbor, every colleague, every person who ever believed his lies. Justice had begun, but its final act was still to come. And I was ready for it. He came back 2 days later, just as the neighborhood mailboxes overflowed with gossip. The afternoon sun baked the street gold, and every curtain twitched as Philip's car pulled into the driveway. He stepped out wearing that same confidence, like a costume-creased shirt, phone in hand, ready to perform. Grace stood by the porch, tense. I waited beside her, calm as the brick under my feet. "You think you won?" he sneered. I spoke to my lawyer. "You can't humiliate me like this and walk away clean." "I didn't humiliate you," I said evenly. "I simply revealed the truth." He laughed, the kind of laugh people use when they've already lost. "I'll fix this. I'll get the bank to reverse it. I'll show them who owns what." "Then you haven't read the paperwork," I said, holding up the envelope he dropped that day. "You were never the owner. You were a tenant of arrogance living on borrowed grace." A few neighbors had gathered near the sidewalk, pretending to water lawns. Phones were out. Philip's eyes darted toward them. He realized too late that pride doesn't look powerful under daylight, it looks desperate. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "No," I said, stepping closer, voice low enough for only him to hear. "Regret belongs to the man who forgot who helped him rise." He froze. For the first time, his face softened not with humility, but with fear. The kind that comes when a man sees himself clearly for the first time. Grace broke the silence. "Philip," she said quietly, "it's over. Stop fighting ghosts." He looked at her like a stranger, mouth trembling, then turned to leave. But I stopped him. "You forgot something," I said, handing him a folded document. "What's this?" "Your release," I said. "It's a legal waiver. It means you leave without debt or damage to your name. I don't need vengeance. I just need peace." He stared at it for a long time, then took it. "You're giving me that? After everything?" "Yes," I said. "Because you were my mistake, not my enemy." He left without another word. The SUV disappeared down the street, and with it went the noise that had haunted the house. Grace leaned against me, tears silent, steady. "Dad, how did you stay so calm?" I smiled faintly. "Because carpenters don't panic when something breaks. They rebuild." That evening, I sat on the porch as the sun went down, the sky bleeding orange into quiet blue. The house glowed behind me mine again, not because of paper, but because peace had finally returned to its rooms. Justice wasn't thunder. It was the sound of silence after the storm. To whoever's listening, remember this. Never mistake kindness for weakness, nor silence for surrender. Even quiet men keep blueprints for justice. What would you have done in my place? Comment below, like this video, and subscribe for more stories.